I guess I would like to start, if you don't mind, by getting your thoughts on what a director does. Thea.
It's fascinating to me how the job has changed and how the answer to that question is different. But in essence, you are, I guess you're the captain of the ship, and you have to lead a team of people. You have to, in many ways, you have many different hats. So you also become a parent.
Diplomacy is a very
is
important.
Big. Is big. Kofi Annan is a huge idol of mine, and Arsene Wenger is my other one. So that's the other thing.
On opening night, you've been the most important person in the project. You are the leader, you're the director, you have to make all the judgment calls. You're the one everybody goes to. In the last 2 weeks, if we're completely honest, when you direct a big opera, I'm sure with film as well, you know, it feels even a bit as if you're God. You know, you sit in the auditorium, you have a huge desk, lots of assistants and people around you. You can say, stop, bring on the chorus. You know, you create a world. You're sometimes a slightly frustrated God, but still, you feel very powerful. Yeah. And then on opening night, you have to let it all go. And although you go backstage and you say, oh, you know, good luck, and please remember in the second act to turn around, you know, basically they want you to go away. You're very, very powerful, and ultimately you can do nothing.
Does the bigger the production, David, mean that you have more to control or less to control?
Actually, oddly, I think the bigger the production, it's all about the key people you work with.
Yeah.
So even though there may be hundreds of people involved, as long as you're working closely with some of those key creatives, your production designer, your composer, obviously the actors, then you get maximum. I mean, I think one of the things you have to do as a director is you really need to focus in on what will have the maximum impact in a production, because there are so many things that you have to concentrate on, so many relationships you have to manage. It's about choosing where to put your time, which is always quite stretched and challenged, and where you're going to put your focus. And I think deciding what's going to really make a big difference to the end result and what isn't is crucial. But I always like, my philosophy is about empowerment. Ultimately, it's about that huge group of people that you're working with across a whole spectrum, you know, from DOPs to operators, even the grip or the sound designer or your producer or the exec at the studio. Ultimately, it is about finding the right pattern of a relationship that will guide through what you want from the process to end up with the best film. And it is managing relationships, and every single relationship, as you say, is fundamentally different. And so...
And imagine every day is different, isn't it? Because it's not like you have a... Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's not like you have the day... I know you obviously have a shooting schedule and things like that, but you never quite know what's going to happen, I guess, in a way as well. Or is it kind of... Yeah. Or is it kind of planned to...
When you're actually shooting something, it's fairly rigorously planned, but within that structure, you know, lots of things can go wrong. Actually, filmmaking is a process of fixing problems, frankly, often, because there are so many things that can surprise you and take you off course a wee bit, and it's how you manage that, and it's how you use those things that go wrong sometimes that get you to a really fun and interesting place. But I mean, simply because certainly even the smaller bits of television I used to do, it is rigorously organised simply because of the amount of money that we burn through in a single day.
Yeah.
You know, a single day shoot on the bigger films that I make is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it has to be organised. Otherwise, people get really frustrated that you're wasting stuff.
Yeah. On the other end, one of the other things that I would always say one has to be as a director is a facilitator almost. So particularly when you're doing new work in the theatre, so you have your actors on the one hand and you have your playwright on the other, and in one sense you are the least important person in the room, because the playwright for me is the most important person and the actors at the end of the day are going to be saying the writer's words, and you, just as Casper says, you can't be there. They have to be able to do it by themselves. Equally, the playwright won't be there, but their words will be with them. Yeah. And you are the person who has to guide those two things to be as magical as possible. And in some ways, that's when you lose your power in a funny way. Although that choice says a lot, I think, about directors, because there are certain directors who would never see themselves like that. For them, it's about being God from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it's about their vision, and that's the most important thing. So if they want to do a production of Measure for Measure, they want to do it in a way that no one's ever done it before, and they don't care if it doesn't make sense necessarily, because it wants to have a stamp on it, and that's the most important thing.
So for my role, I had to be a director of sorts, directing people's day-to-day scenes and what they would be doing in those scenes, and helping devise their scenes. For this, I did quite a bit of research. The first thing I did was watch a roundtable discussion between various actors that were nominated for the Oscars that year. So I had the 2016 Oscars, sorry, and the 2017. 2015 Oscars and the 2016 Oscars nominees. And they talked about many things, many things, especially about how to control a cast and how to tell when a problem is going to arise, or when something is going to go wrong. I'll put in a clip now.
Well, could walk us through one of your most difficult days on the set of one of your films?
Oh my God.
Because your films often have huge spectacle, hundreds of extras, actors everywhere. Give us an example of a terrifying day.
Yeah, there's like 3,000 people on the set. You got 9 cameras. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of people to feed. There's people complaining. Everybody has to be in the right place at the right time to get the shot. I mean, logistically speaking, you need a pretty good team of people around you to deal with that stuff. And you need a lot of energy. I remember before they had all these monitors so you could look at all the different cameras, I was on a 4-wheeler in a kilt with long hair, just like going around and looking at all the cameras and saying, that's a good shot. Can you like do this with the frame or put another lens on or whatever it happened to be? And you just, look, I find it's so overwhelming sometimes. If you think about the big picture, you'd crawl back into a hole and die. So what you have to do, and when you're dropped in the middle of the ocean, and an ocean of a sea of troubles and people and logistical problems and cameras and infighting, and the producers are, there's so much stuff going on behind the scene. You have to ignore it. Say you're in the middle of the ocean and just start swimming that way. Stroke at a time, and you'll hit land eventually. So that's all there is to it. You haven't really got time once you're amongst it to actually be fearful or too worried, because you're just too damn busy. How many decisions do you get asked in an hour, right? When you're in the chair, how many questions, how many decisions do you have to make? And I mean, like that. And you got to do it fast. Especially now. I mean, look, I think we've all been relegated to the area where we're sort of independent films. Am I right here? It's kind of independent filmmaking.
Interesting.
This is a whole new cinematic landscape. You don't have the luxuries that you used to anymore. I just did a film, this Hacksaw Ridge thing. I had 59 days. Right? I had twice that time on Braveheart, and I had more of a budget, and that was 20 years ago. I had 59 days to do like 3 major pitch battle sequences and stuff with the logistical nightmare of explosions and extras and soldiers and stunts and everything else, and it's just, I don't know. You don't know how you're going to do it, It's trying to cram like 10 pounds of, shit in a 5-pound bag, you know? It's
But there's a
impossible.
great beauty in looking into the eye of the storm and just having that one thing to focus on when you're directing a film. I mean, it's all this machinations, everything. You might have all of this at your disposal or to be controlled, but there is a real sort of almost a simplicity to be in that state of
Shock.
of shock, but also of complete focus that is what you're looking for. And you will not stop until you get that and all these elements to come together, to get that moment, hopefully an epiphany, but most likely not. You have to create the epiphany later.
It's interesting. I find
but
that under
very-
duress, you
yeah.
actually make better decisions. And when you're pushed, I actually get calm. I remember being
I
on an
do.
airplane when I was
Yeah.
21, and one of the engines caught on fire.
Oh, wow.
And the hostess freaked out. Wow. Right? She's like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. And it's amazing how quiet you get.
Basically explained pretty much what the deal is with having so many people on set and in your cast at once, which helped me, especially in my panto work, with managing people and trying to figure out ways of getting around misbehaviour. For example, I did plenty of scenes with the fairies, and most of the fairies didn't really give it their all. So we had to readjust the fairy scene so after a certain point in the acts only certain fairies appeared, which it made sense because you don't want all the fairies on at once, but it would have been better if we kept all the fairies on, but obviously you can't do that when they're all acting up. Another thing about those round tables is the personal effect that you can have while directing. Like, I'll just show you this clip.
So
Yeah,
does that make it harder or
definitely.
easier?
It makes it easier, you know, because you sort of don't know what the pitfalls are. You kind of just charge ahead like a wild dog, you know, after a piece of meat. You know, in this film, you know, the playwright Terrell McCraney wrote this thing in Moonlight Black Boys Look Blue, and I sort of fell into it because there's this character who's basically his mom, and my mom and Terrell's mom both went through this horrible addiction to crack cocaine. And Naomi Harris, you know, plays our mom in this film, essentially. And I like to be, you know, I'm a very, you know, it's nuts and bolts, you know. I'm on set, you know, there's a camera, there are the actors, there's a crew, you know, we're working, we're craftspeople. But then when this very, like, highly skilled actor is portraying your mom in the neighborhood you grew up in, like, in the apartment, and all these people are watching, and she's really, really good, and you know, I can separate it. I want to go to this place that I think it needs to go to. If I'm gonna dig up this shit, you know, then the audience is gonna experience it, you know, as potently as possible. You know, we had this issue with her visa, so instead of shooting her over the course of like 5 weeks, we shot all her work in 3 days.
Wow.
So for 3 days, I am just living in this basically, I'm walking therapy. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do because I had to separate myself, the director, from myself, the human being, reliving all these things that I've tried my hardest to not relive. But this really beautiful thing happened where, because I was feeling so much, it came out in the craft. And there's a scene we were doing where, you know, it's like Naomi and this, Ashton Sanders was playing the main character, and it's the first time he sees his mom as this other person. And, you know, we shot at OTS, you know, cameras here, cameras there. And I just had this feeling that it hasn't gone far enough. And so after we were done with the scene, I turned to Naomi. I was like, hey, would you mind if we did a take with you looking right into the camera? Because I realized I wanted to put the audience in the body of my main character. And she's like, no, of course, I don't mind. I go, hey, put the 50 on. And then I go, and let's shoot it at 48 frames. I can only think of that because that's how it felt to live it. And it's one of like my favorite scenes in the film. It's not shot listed, not planned, but it came from this thing because it was so tough. I mean, just so tough to do these things, it just took the art to a new place, for me at least. So I think out of that struggle that there came some...
Has your mother seen the film?
She has not seen the film. You know, we four-walled the theater for her, and she said she was going to see it, and then a couple of days before decided she wasn't ready. She'll see it on her own schedule. But my sister has seen it and relayed to my mom what's in the film. You know, she did say, you know, I did those things. You know, I was out there, and so I'm proud that you made it. But I have to see it on my own schedule. So no, she hasn't seen it yet.
So as you can see there, that's the director of Moonlight. He famously did a film about being gay within the ghetto, the black ghetto, and within a primarily black-dominated culture. And he had many similarities to the Moonlight movie, as his mother also did struggle with drug addiction, and he also experienced that kind of intimate relationship and hazardous environment that we see on screen. Another thing is the absolute geniusness of certain directors, like, as you can see in this clip.
I want to go back to if you thought of doing anything else at any point. Quentin, what about you?
Well, I'm probably only going to make 10 movies, so I'm already planning on what I'm going to do.
You know, you
after
said
that.
this, so you're going to... Are you seriously only going to do 10?
That's why I'm counting them. That's why...
You got 2 more left.
Yeah, 2 more left, yeah.
Why?
I want to stop at a certain point. I don't...
But what would you do then?
What I want to do basically is I want to write novels and I want to write theater and I want to direct theater. Well, that's how I feel about it. I got to see how I feel when Hateful Eight is over, after I get through going all around the world on it and everything, if I still have the same juice for it. But the next thing I'd like to do is do a theatrical adaptation of Hateful Eight, because I actually like the idea of other actors having a chance to play my characters and see what happens from that and everything. So that's where I'm working my way into that time period where I write novels and write film pieces and film books and story novels, but in particular theater and directing theater.
But that's an evolution, so it's good.
Yeah, that's how I look at it.
Have you ever directed theater?
No, never have.
Have you ever written a play?
No, you know everything I've written.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting.
The screenplay is a play.
Hateful Eight.
I mean, look, Reservoir Dogs could be put on stage and has been put on stage
Hateful Eight was
many
done
times.
as a stage reading.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you learn from that?
I learned that for the most part, I picked the right actors, because the actors, for the most part, that were in that stage reading were the ones in the movie. The other thing that I learned, and this was actually a big part of my thought process, by doing it, and I don't want to get lost into a technical discussion, but by doing it in 65 millimeter and wanting it to be shown in 70, and so we're making these plans before we even shot the movie. I wouldn't be so confident with the idea of thinking about exhibition that early on if I wasn't that confident with the material. And the script reading really went a long way as far as that's concerned. I mean, in something like Inglourious Basterds and Django, you can read it as a script, and I'm very proud of it as almost as a piece of literature, not as a blueprint. But I still have to make it. There still is I have to still figure it out. It's not figured out. It's not for sure that I'm going to pull it off. There is a finding it in the course of making it. That's not the case with this. With the case of Hateful Eight, it was right there. I mean, if I had those actors and we did it in a little theater in Santa Monica Boulevard, 99 seats, it would kill. It would be terrific. If I did it at the Mark Taper Forum, it would be great. If I did it at the Brooks Atkinson Theater, it would be great. If I shot it on 16 millimeter, it would be great. I'm not saying the movie's great. I'm just saying that I like the material. So I had a confidence in it. And so why not do it big?
There we have Quentin Tarantino talking about him only doing 10 movies because he wants to do new things and he wants to be a writer. Like myself, I also want to just write, and that's the job of a director, in my opinion. It's to tell the best story that you can and make it personal to you, make it personal to the people watching. Everyone has these relatable moments in their life. Say like everyone has been to a movie because the person who is, say, watching a movie has been to a movie because they're watching it. That's relatable. So capturing relatability to affect audience members is quite a good way to go about it. That's something that I would have hoped to do in my panto directing, but as it is pantomime, there isn't very much in the case of nuance and subtlety, so I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's also Mel Gibson, who famously produced some very anti-Semitic comments. He talks about critics and people that, due to his drunken statements and comments about Jewish people, don't go to watch his movie, which is a shame because there's this thing that within art it's sometimes needed to actually fully enjoy the art. It's where you separate the art from the artist. That's why, like, for example, Andy Warhol, he was Andy Warhol, he was very good because he was quite an pop culture fanatic, but he still separated himself from what he was doing. Also, the other thing that I learnt about was a infamous story about Stanley Kubrick, where he, in the famous Here's Johnny scene in The Shining, he didn't inform the female actor that was working on set that day, and just let Jack Nicholson come through with an axe without telling her. Now it's one of those cruelty for the sake of art, which I tend to agree with in my own opinion, because sometimes you need to crack a few eggs before you can make an omelette, unfortunately. But this is the problem with pantomime. There's not much area for me to use those kinds of techniques. the techniques I could use were probably, as I've shown before, the getting people sit down and write for reading lines and performing. But there's not much you can really do if you have a bad cast. One of the other things I've looked at is directors like Ridley Scott, who prior to working on films and stuff like that, he directed loads of commercials, and that grew his confidence, because it allowed him, when he went on to making films, it was simple. It was just like here to here, here to here, here to here. And that's how I view most of my things. I want it simplistic for me to be like, you do this, do that, you do this, and then this will happen after that. A very structured plan is needed when directing, I believe. Another thing is the atmosphere that is created by a director. For example, there was this story about Jonah Hill. He was on set with Martin Scorsese for The Wolf of Wall Street, and Jonah Hill couldn't get a line right. He was just stumbling over and over. They did about 10 takes, and then Martin Scorsese just said, right, we'll take 5 minutes. He told Jonah Hill to come over to him so they can talk. Jonah Hill sat down next to Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese pulled out a newspaper and then just started reading it for 5 minutes. Jonah Hill was just sat there in complete silence. Once the 5 minutes was up, Martin Scorsese said, all right, now go act and perform. And Jonah Hill nailed it on the first attempt with going back. It was a good directing technique, where if you have a reputation of being a hotshot as a director, just calming it down, lowering it to where you're just hanging with someone that's a normal guy that's just reading a newspaper. I found that very interesting, as it is a technique that I would actually use within my future prospects. For example, in directors, I would love to use that. Another thing also is when directing, you also, from writing to rehearsals and stuff, and then actually performing, the three very different things. you're writing something that's completely new. Rehearsing, you're changing things, you're making something new again. And then once you perform, especially in pantomime, because so much is improvised, you're making something new again. Which I love the thought of constantly making things new. Not having something that is just seen one time and then it's the same all the time. Like minute details that change, that's something I adore. A very good quote by Stanley Kubrick is that, how is it that I can spend 2 years making something for someone then to review the thing that I've made in 200 words or less? Which is basically the ultimate dilemma of a director and any artist. What's the point of making something that you spend so much time on to just be talked about and analysed? That's so short. Like, their analysation of your piece didn't take the amount of time and effort you put in to make that piece. It's very quick, very upsetting in a manner, because you want your piece to be understood, but not understood so much that it can be just written about within 200 words. Because that, it makes the piece that you've done seem like there wasn't much to talk about, or there wasn't much complexity within the piece, which can be saddening, especially if you're someone like Stanley Kubrick, who is probably one of the greatest directors that has ever lived. Another thing is the way people get their start in directing also. Many people don't really choose directing. Like, I didn't choose to really direct at the start. I just really fell into it, like many other directors. No one really says to themselves, yes, I want to direct, as there is so much burden, so much like intense frustration within directing, as I've watched in these roundtables, like where there's one of a woman director who shot in Kambali, it's an African ghetto, and she shot with some of the kids there, and because it was very, very hot, they had a hot tub, swimming pool kind of thing on set, just over, in the corner or whatever. And every time that the kids would finish their scene, in the sweltering heat, they would just go and jump into the swimming pool hot tub thing, and that is quite extraordinary, to be honest. As it would have been super stressful if there was just there without anything to enjoy. Although there is like many other things that goes into it, like stress of finances, stress of time. Time is a huge key point. They've got this funny thing that they've mentioned in one of these round tables. It's when you shoot a dog, not actually shoot a dog, but like you are filming with a dog in the scene. They're one of the most difficult animals to, film with, because you have to take multiple shots, because most of the dogs are very not well behaved, shall we say. So yeah, that's something I've also looked into, like what are the differences and the costs and hazards of working with different animals, and also different types of people. Like to take it back to the woman that was in the slum in Africa, she was working with a lot of people that barely had any food, barely had any clean drinking water or anything like that. So, and obviously when you're around that kind of poverty, there would be quite a lot of violence and crime that goes and associates itself with that due to poverty. So you have to look out for that also. Another interesting thing that I researched was the colour consciousness. It's a book by Natalie Kulmer. She was the Technicolor supervisor for about 300 films in the early 30s to late 50s. She supervised all the Technicolor uses and all that kind of stuff, because her husband was the inventor of Technicolor, and she knew the processes and how to get that vivid colour. And she wrote a book about the different uses of colours and what they represent and how they can evoke emotion, and what they can be best used for, and that kind of stuff. It's a very interesting read. Many things about that also, like there was a bit about how colour influences our vision of something. So say like you saw a woman with red lipstick, you would think of blood, life, or love, which is obviously like very passionate, but it also gives off this sense of warning and danger that's lurking in the air. But if you have a woman with purple lips, that can symbolise aggression and a dignified quiet, maybe royalty, maybe being solo, maybe vanity. Different colours mean different things. Like, for another example, green, nature, the outdoors, freedom, freshness, growth, vigour, jealousy, even. Although that's normally associated with a yellow or a gold when it's used in a darker shade. That's pretty much it for my director's research. There's not much else I can say about the directors, although all these directors that I saw had the same like idea that they all subscribe to, which is making the audience happy. Because that is something that is obviously needed. You need to make your audience happy, otherwise you're not going to have a good show. You're not going to have a good time. You're not going to like the performance itself. You're not going to put your all in. If you don't want to make the audience happy, what do you want to do? Do you want to make them sad? Do you want to make them cry? Do you want to make them feel confused? You need to have a reason of what you want the audience to feel. Because the worst thing you can do as a director is direct something that makes people feel nothing. Like they're indifferent to it. Indifference is the worst enemy of a director. That's me, signing off. Boom shakalaka boom.